either it's very serious instability where Putin has lost control of his security forces, and Wagner fighters are allowed to pretty much do what they please,
Mm.
which would suggest that the kind of rebellion maybe isn't over and could well continue. Or the other side of it is that this is all just being kept very murky and opaque. And they're either, Prigozhin has some kind of other deal that we don't know about, or he's already been killed in Belarus.
2 weeks on from his rebellion against the army, it seems Yevgeny Prigozhin is not in Belarus, as had been ordered by Vladimir Putin, but could actually be in Russia. So suggests Belarus President Lukashenko, who says photos have emerged of the Wagner mercenary leader disguised in wigs in Russia, potentially in St. Petersburg, but there's also reports he's in Moscow. Let's speak to Maxim Tucker, former Kyiv correspondent, now an editor on the Times foreign desk, well, who's been doing his best to follow Prigozhin's movements. Maxim, good morning.
Good morning.
Do we know where he is? What clarity can you offer this morning?
Well, we've seen his private jet moving around. It did go to Belarus for some time, and then it's moved to St. Petersburg, and yesterday flew towards Moscow and then towards the south of Russia. So if he is on that jet, he's moving around a lot. Ukraine's military intelligence yesterday said that he was in St. Petersburg, and Lukashenko is just saying he's not in Belarus anymore and he's in Russia. But we haven't heard from Yevgeny Prigozhin since the 26th of June. So it's quite a long time for somebody who was really quite prolific in his making speeches and delivering audio recordings over Telegram. And his media holdings have been shuttered in the meantime. And there seems to be a campaign against him in the Kremlin-controlled press.
And what does it matter where he is? And by that, I mean, what are the implications of his possible whereabouts in different countries?
Well, if he's free in Russia and roaming around, it's really a shot in the eye for Putin, because this is a guy who led a mutiny at a march on Moscow and was allowed to leave on condition that he went into exile. He was allowed to survive. But now it seems like not only has he been allowed to get away with a mutiny, but he's also been allowed to break the deal with Putin and travel around Russia. So if he really is in Russia, it's an astonishing display of contempt for Putin's rule. It demonstrates that Putin is not in control of the situation. The other possibility is that, Yevgeny Prigozhin has already been disposed of, and this campaign to smear his name is it's part of an attempt to justify that when it comes out.
That suggests that he is still carrying power and influence as well, doesn't? Or some of these scenarios do. Certainly, that the fact that if he is walking free, that, I mean, frankly, Maxim, to an extent, the fact that he's still alive suggests that he has some influence and power.
Right. If he's still alive and he's still in Moscow or St. Petersburg or wherever he is in Russia, that suggests that he has people in the security forces that back him, that protect him, and it's not easy for Putin to get at him. And that's a kind of nightmare scenario for Putin.
Mm. In terms of the Kremlin, do we have an understanding of, well, what the situation is in the Kremlin around Putin in the aftermath, a couple of weeks on from this uprising?
Well, as ever, it's a very opaque situation. Immediately after the uprising, Putin called together his chiefs of staff and his ministers and his security officials to demonstrate unity and their support for him. And he's obviously still got control of the press, because they've mounted this campaign, which is smearing Prigozhin by releasing images from his mansion. But, if he's unable to actually apprehend him and do anything to stop his movements, and has to say that he's not tracking Prigozhin, that suggests he doesn't have the full control that he once had.
And what of the Wagner group as well? Does he still lead them? And I remember reporting a couple of weeks ago on Wagner still sort of successfully recruiting people, actually. People were quite enthused by Wagner and their movement. So is Prigozhin still their leader? Is that leader in name only or in reality? And where are Wagner? What are they doing? How are they moving?
So we've seen some troop movements in abandoned Soviet bases in Belarus, which suggests that Wagner had moved into Belarus in part. But Ukrainian military intelligence also said that they still remain in bases in Luhansk and Donetsk oblasts, of the occupied parts of Ukraine. So and Lukashenko said yesterday that the final destination of Wagner and where they will set up shop and their main base will be is unclear. So that's odd again, because it had seemed that all of the Wagner fighters who had taken part in the rebellion would end up in Belarus. So things seem to be shifting again.
It's an ever-changing situation, isn't it? In terms of stability, then, that the ever-changing nature of this suggests instability. Is that your analysis as well, Maxim? And how precarious is that instability, if indeed it exists?
Well, I think it's two scenarios. Either it's very serious instability where Putin has lost control of his security forces, and Wagner fighters are allowed to pretty much do what they please, which would suggest that the kind of rebellion maybe isn't over and could well continue. Or the other side of it is that this is all just being kept very murky and opaque, and they're either, Prigozhin has some kind of other deal that we don't know about, or he's already been killed in Belarus.
Maxim, it's really interesting to speak to you as ever. Thank you so much. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. Maxim Tucker is former Kyiv correspondent, now an editor on the Times foreign desk, who, as you've heard there, has been closely monitoring Prigozhin's movements and the implications of his movement, and also the very consideration that if he is moving around, then that by extension means he is, first of all, alive, and second of all, has some sort of power and influence in order to have that level of freedom. What the reality is, as Maxim was saying, is slightly opaque in all of this. But it is interesting to consider how big a figure he has become, certainly in the longer term, but perhaps for us to learn about in the last few weeks.
Yeah, and it's something we'll certainly follow here on Times Radio, because it feels like that story's got lots of twists and turns to come. In the next few minutes,